Question?
Yes. It seems that rent control is supposed to be helping renters. How is it that it's not?
Well, yeah, would seem to make sense that you're thinking, well, rent control should help the tenants, but you know, that's a very short-term sort of outlook on things, and it's the kind of answer that sounds good, especially when it's on a camera, but it's really, really not, and I'll explain why. Well, actually, let me start by saying it can be if you are planning on staying in the same lease for the rest of your life, and then you have rent control. Of course, that makes sense. But if you ever plan on moving, it really doesn't make sense, and there's two reasons for it. The smaller reason is, well, because of people like me. I'm a domestic investor. I own several condos, as many of you do in this room, and you rent that back out. You rent that back out to the public, to the tenants who need it, and that is providing a very valuable service. Because what most people don't know is that after 1991, when original rent control was introduced, that targeted a lot of the purpose-built rental apartments, and those often ugly brown beige monstrosities that you see scattered throughout our city. But after rent control was introduced, well, companies stopped building that product because it wasn't as profitable anymore. So between the years of 91 and 2013, you had something like 1,100 purpose-built rentals built in the entire city of Toronto. That's not units, by the way. I mean buildings, that's units introduced. So really it didn't do anything to increase supply. It killed supply. And now purpose-built rental apartments have a vacancy rate of 1.4%, and condo apartments have even less, at 1%, and in many areas of our city, it's actually near 0%. So the domestic investor now is faced with an interesting situation where they have rent control on the condos that they're buying. And do they want to deal with that headache? Even in my own situation, I'm wondering if maintenance fees were to increase to the point where I'm no longer covering my costs, then I would consider exiting some of those investments because it doesn't make sense anymore, and it's too much red tape and too much headache. See, because as many of you in this room will agree, you're not renting these things out to make a fortune month over month. You're renting them out so that you pay off your debt obligations. So it's a real consideration now when the province introduces rent control because it makes it harder to cover your costs. And we all know hydro bills are skyrocketing, and maintenance fees are going up as a result. And the other part of that legislation that you have is says that you are actually limited in going for exceptions to that rent control cap based on increasing hydro rates. The government's actually said, no, that's no longer a valid reason. But if I'm thinking it as just one small investor, the bigger problem, and this is the second reason rent control doesn't make sense for tenants, the bigger problem that we face is that now corporations, big corporations, Concert Properties is just one example that I can think of that involves the teachers' pension fund. I mean, these are massive companies, real estate investment trusts. They're the ones who are actually building rental apartments, and that is now going to stop because they're thinking the same things the domestic investor is on a much larger scale because they're calculating in their performance the profit, and certainly rent control comes into play. They were building. We had 30,000 rental units on the way in the next couple of years, and that's the concern. Is now that construction was, once again, we saw it in 91, it's going to stop again. And we have therefore two main avenues of all this rent supply coming to the market effectively sort of cut off. And long term for our tenants, that means just one thing. That means less supply, increasing demand for the reasons we talked about earlier. That basically means your rents are going to go up. And to landlords, or you can't blame them for this, going to start their rents a little bit higher as an insurance measure. So all we've done really for the tenant in this city is made things a lot more difficult for them in a very difficult situation as it is. Anything else?